Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Making the Argument. We're going to have an interesting discussion today. Look, I think if you've been watching the show for a while or if you've seen my other content, you know that we talk a lot about masculinity and what does that actually mean. And I believe that it has largely been under attack from a lot of different angles, and I think there's various reasons for that. And I think we can always look at certain things within masculinity, certain components, and say, look, there's positive manifestations of masculinity and there's negative ones. And obviously we want to exemplify, we want to encourage the positive aspects of that. But that has not been the option that a lot of young men feel like they have been given. A lot of young men look around at the world today and feel like they are the enemy, like they are the universal punching bag for everything that's going wrong. And a lot of other men, I know I'm one of them, that says, no, man, you got to be strong. You got to be capable. You got to have a family. And they're looking back at me going, Nick, I don't have that option. I don't have a wife. I don't have kids. I don't have any prospects of getting any. And so the things you're telling me to fight for don't exist in my world. And culture has pretty much told them to stop crying about it. And I'm going to tell you this right now. Young men are going to revolt. They're going to revolt against the current cultural pushback that they're feeling right now. And they're going to revolt in one of two ways. They're either going to listen to the idea that they should be strong and capable for purely hedonistic reasons, to basically get back and get revenge at all the people that told them that there was something wrong with them, told them to sit down and shut up, told them that they didn't get a say. They're either going to develop in that way, or they're going to develop in a way that respects honor and duty and responsibility and creates the sort of world where not only masculinity can flourish, but one where femininity can flourish. So they're gonna pick one of those two paths. And today I brought on somebody that I admire a great deal, and someone that I hope will be the sort of guy that other young men can look to follow as an exemplar, because he had an incredible military service. He had an incredible service within MMA. He's had an incredible journey when it comes to saving people out of dangerous situations, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about. But I can't wait for you all to meet him if you haven't already. And that's someone that I consider a friend, Chad Robichaud. Chad, thanks for being here today, man.
Thanks, man. Honored to be on, and I've actually been looking forward to this conversation with you. Had the privilege of having you on the Resilient Show and my show, and interviewing you there, and I just had so much more I want to talk to you about. So I'm pumped.
No, I had a great time. And again, I'm going to be honest, man. I was intimidated when you called up and said, "Hey, would you like to be on the show?" It was like, oh crap, yeah. But it was a great experience, and we had a great conversation. But just first and foremost, can you give everyone? I mean, look, we could be here for a couple of hours at least, talking about all the things you've experienced. You have one of the most gosh, man, storied lives. It's pretty fantastic. It's pretty incredible. But can you give us like the Cliff's Notes version of Chad Robichaud?
Yeah, I'll try to summarize it. You come from a long history of military in my family, 80 plus years, dating back to World War One, World War Two, Korea. My father was the first Marine in our family. He served as an infantryman in Vietnam. I served as a Force Recon Marine. I did 8 deployments to Afghanistan on a joint Special Operations Command task force with one of our special mission units or tier 1 units. And then both my sons served in the Marines. One of them went to Afghanistan, same conflict that I was in, and another, he did 8 years in the Marine Corps, and another is actually still in the Marine Corps Reserves. He served as a crash fire rescue Marine, or serving as a crash fire rescue Marine. So a long history of military in our family. For me, I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. Grew up in South Louisiana, and very much like when I say South Louisiana, like mud between your toes, swamp people, South Louisiana.
Yeah.
So grew up, hunting and fishing since I was like 6 years old, very much outdoorsman. When I say grew up in a dysfunctional home, it's because my father came home from Vietnam very broken. And so I grew up in that type of household. And when I was 17 years old, I joined the Marine Corps as a lifelong dream. Me and my brother had decided at 13 years old we were going to do that to maybe uh, feel that desire that kind of inside of us to be in the military and do wild, ambitious things. But mainly it was to have a fresh start in life, which is for a lot of young military people. A lot of young, we're talking about masculinity here. A lot of young men and women around our country, but especially a lot of young men, they want to be able to go pave their own way. And the military creates a tremendous opportunity to do that. Every branch of service, no matter what branch you join, there's a right of entry, like not just at MEPS when you raise your hand and swear in, but when you get to boot camp at the Marine Corps, you get to MCRD San Diego or Parris Island. You stand on these yellow footprints because no one knows where to stand because you're scared. People are yelling at you, and so you stand on these yellow footprints and you raise your hand and you give that oath to defend your country and to commit to this life of being a Marine. And when I get to speak, I've spoken to over 500,000 active duty troops now, and when I go speak at boot camp, it's one of the places I love speaking most. And I've been speaking there for 10 years now. And I speak to them. I remind them of that moment. That was just a few days ago for them. Maybe as long, the longest would be 3 months. And I remember myself standing on those yellow footprints. And what happens in that moment as a young man, or like I said, in some cases, young women, is that you face this point to where it doesn't matter where you came from, who your dad was, what color you are, if you're black, white, brown, Asian. It doesn't matter if your daddy was rich, poor, popular, hated, if you lived in the projects or a trailer park or a mansion. It doesn't matter. What happens in that moment as a young man or woman gets to make a decision of beginning over, having their own trajectory for their life. And I think that's just such a powerful thing that every young person should face, whether in the military or not, to where you can make the decision for yourself of walking away from where you came from and paving your own way. And for me, that was something I had always desired to do because I grew up in this dysfunctional environment. My brother and I, at 13 years old, decided we wanted to do that. A year into us preparing to go into special operations, because that's what we chose what we were going to do. We were lifelong athletes. My brother was shot and killed, and so it's very devastating for me. And a little bit of family had broke apart, but it instilled this commitment that I had made with my brother to fulfill that. And so when I was 17 years old, I joined the Marine Corps, and I didn't even have a high school diploma. I went to the recruiter, and I still remember his name, Staff Sergeant Ronald Brown, 30 years ago. Most people remember the recruiter's name because they hate them. I remember him because I love him because he helped petition for me to get in the Marine Corps without a high school diploma because of this hardship situation I was in. And I made a promise after infantry school to get my GED, and I did. And all these years later, I have MBA. I always joke I can't spell MBA, but I got one. And I did that because the opportunity the Marine Corps gave me. And but after infantry school, I was committed to fulfill that promise that my brother and I made to try out and become a reconnaissance Marine and enter the special operations world in the Marine Corps. And I did. And lots of great jobs in the military, but nothing was more fitting for me than to be a reconnaissance Marine. I wanted to jump out of airplanes and do military free fall. I wanted to dive. I wanted to bust through doors and shoot bad guys in the face. That's what as a young man, that's what I desired to do. And I got to do all those things. But I went in there in peacetime, 1993. So almost 10 years of doing that job and not ever getting a chance to actually deploy. I did some counter drug missions in South America and stuff, but nothing like kinetic combat that we would see, in this 20 years that we've been in, over 20 years now. And so when those planes flew into World Trade Center buildings, being a sergeant at 3rd Force Recon Company, I was the military free fall team leader. Like the first plane hit the building, and I'm like, what kind of idiot flies an airplane in that building, right? That's what everybody thought at first. And then the second plane hit, and we knew it was intentional. And immediately I was, oh my gosh, like my life just changed. The whole world just changed. Yeah. My life's never going to be the same. And everyone was, if people that were in the military listening right now know, it's like the military, no one was like, oh my gosh, we're going to war. Everyone was like, hey, look, what's up, sir? Let's go freaking do this. Like the military is motivated. And I thought I was going to deploy right away. And our unit we augmented at 2nd Force Recon, but we didn't get a full unit deployment. And so I was like chomping at the bit to go. And everyone was. And I had the opportunity to try out for that JSOC task force, was very blessed and privileged. I was probably the least qualified person to try out at that time. They gave me an opportunity to go there and represent the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps doesn't have a JSOC unit, so we get the opportunity. Usually, like 6 Marines at a time get to go to Task Force Orange, the unit Delta Force, or the command SEAL Team 6 Dev Group. And so, like 6 Marines at a time, every 3 years get a chance to go represent the Marine Corps there. And so it's a very privileged opportunity, and I was beyond honored to be able to do that. And I did 8 deployments in that capacity. I worked as a AFO, Advanced Force Operator, doing clandestine logistics. Essentially,
wait, real quick. I want to slow this down just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just so everyone's, JSOC is Joint Special Operations Command, and what when you talk about like the logistics coordination and whatnot, some people are hearing things like, "Oh yeah, no, you're facilitating supplies."
Yeah.
I'm telling you right now, Ch- I can already tell Chad's gonna give you the Cliff's Notes version of this because I asked for that, but you need to understand that what Chad is about to describe him doing is like some sort of combination between James Bond, Lawrence of Arabia, and friggin' Rambo, right? So Chad, please continue. But I needed to make sure that people understand how incredible the work that you were doing really is.
It probably is one of the coolest jobs in special operations. But also it's the one job that no one wants to do, right? Like if you go to one of these premier units and ask the guys who wants to be an AFO, and all the assaulters are like, I want to blow the door open and go into, like, the odds are stacked against us. We're gonna kill everybody in the room. That's what people join those units to do. And so the AFO, you don't get to do any of that because you work by yourself in a singleton capacity. You get partnered up with a local national, and in 8 deployments, I lived on base about 2 weeks. So you're living off base with the local populace, learning the language, eating the food, living in their homes. And essentially what the job is to make sure that assault force gets on target to capture or kill bad guys, because that's their job. And the command I was at, whoever's on the top 10 from Bin Laden to number 10, whoever's on the menu at that time, that's who they were going after. So we did over in 8 deployments. Aziz, who was my partner, interpreter, teammate, and we facilitated over 100 missions to get the assaulters on target. So you're there months ahead of them, living in Taliban villages. The kind of unique thing about that job is you're not in the permissive areas, because
Yeah.
conventional forces are going to, the top level bad guys are in the Federal Administrative Tribal Warriors. They're in across the border in Pakistan. They're in places that conventional military are not. And so it doesn't matter how good Delta Force or Dev Group is at assaulting. If they don't have access and placement to get there, they're useless, right? So you got to be able to get them there and get them there in an unconventional way. And it's the AFOs that are on the ground in advance facilitating all of that. So it's a very neat job. It's very clever. But when I went there to the unit, I remember going to the command and thinking like, oh my gosh, like, I always thought Force Recon was amazing, all the gear and gadgets and budget we had. But then you get there and like, man, we're like so primitive. Like these guys have everything. Like what makes such tier one unit tier one is they have their own lawyers, their own doctors, their own air fleet. They don't have to request anything from it. They have their own aircraft and pilots and everything. So you have all these resources. I'm like, this is amazing. Like I have everything I'm going to need to be supported. The one thing I didn't realize is the one person in that command that doesn't have access to any of that is the AFO. It's cut off from you don't have radio, so I'm like, I have
Yeah.
access to none of that. And so you're kind of just out on your own doing this job, and you're working directly for the CEO or XO. Uh, and but it is an amazing job. It's an amazing opportunity. I'm very privileged for that opportunity that I had, and to work with Aziz. And but it was a very difficult time. And I want to say this because of the topic.
Yeah.
When I got to Afghanistan the first time, uh, I wasn't a kid. I was almost 30 years old. I had a tremendous amount of experience. The command, you go through a tremendous amount of training to do that job. So I felt very prepared. And I landed on the tarmac on Bagram Air Force Base, and didn't fly with my unit because of my job. I flew there to meet my unit. So I was waiting at night to meet my link up, and I walked out to the edge of there was some Tesco barriers and some Constantino wire over the top. It was still pretty primitive at the time. Um, and so I walked out to the edge of those HESCO barriers, and I'm standing out there, and this moment hit me like the reality of, I think everybody's probably experienced this. I'm actually in combat. Like all this training, all my life, I always wanted this, and now it's real. Like I'm actually here in combat and out there in the dark, past these HESCO barriers is the enemy, the Taliban, and over the next few months, they're going to try to kill me, and I'm going to try to kill them. That's like what's really about to happen. And the
Yeah.
reality of that moment kind of just hits you, and like, am I ready to do what I was sent here to do? Like it's kind of an inventory. You probably should ask that question. In the military, we talk about these pillars of resiliency, like mind, body, spirit, and social. Like, am I mentally, do I have the, am I, I had the right perspective, I had the right attitude, I was motivated, I had good wisdom and knowledge from my training. Body, like physically, I'm in the best shape of my life. Socially, I'm with the best unit I could possibly be with all the resources. Of course, like I said, I don't have access to any of that eventually, but I'm with the best people. And spiritually, well, I had the word Christian stamped on my dog tag. So I believed at that shallow level that was enough. But the truth is, if I had a chink in my armor, it was my spiritual pillar. And the reason why is because I felt like that circumstance, that environment pushed me into a corner to make a decision of, can I be a person of faith, or do I have to be a warrior? Like, to choose between being a warrior or being a person of faith. And I looked at faith and morality and church and the men that I saw in church, going and dragging my family to church every week, and I just looked at them as weak. I looked at men in the church as weak, and I didn't aspire to be that. And I didn't think that I could have this warrior lifestyle and being a person of faith at the same time. I felt like the two couldn't coexist. So
Yeah.
I felt like I had a decision to make. And if a young warrior like that in that environment's, you're probably always going to choose being a warrior, being masculine over faith, right? So I felt like I had to choose between masculinity and Christianity. And I'll tell you, firsthand, but especially for young men listening right now, there is no bigger lie of the enemy, the spiritual enemy, Satan, than that men have to choose between their masculinity and their faith. Because I learned on the battlefield of combat and the battlefield of life, there is no one stronger than people of faith, including the warped, evil Taliban. And
Mhm.
while they're still there for after 20 years of us just demolishing them, we beat them in every area. But their spiritual resilience is what keeps them in the fight. Um, I wish I
You
would
know,
do that.
it's no, it's interesting you say that because I remember I grew up a Christian, went into the military. I always considered myself a Christian. Wasn't very active in my life in any real sense of the word, but I remember the when people ask me what kind of led you to be reintroduced introduced to your faith. Like, first of all, it's like, why wasn't it strong in the first place? Well, it wasn't it strong not because my mom didn't do everything he could or she could, and not because my dad discouraged her. Anything. It wasn't that, but it was. I grew up in this faith that I felt was very emotional, very kind of like, either this is just who we are, or it was kind of. I wasn't impressed by a lot of the men I saw in church.
Yeah,
It was kind of a similar thing. And it was three men, Anthony Brown, a guy whose name I cannot remember in the 18 Fox course and the Special Forces Intelligence course, and a team leader I had, Ryan Nienaber. Those three guys were guys that I respected as men. And I remember thinking like, okay, yeah, no, I need to once again take this seriously because like you said, it's not an either or proposition. And in fact, if I want to do a better job of reflecting the kind of warrior I would like to be, then this has to be a more active part of who I am. But I want to ask you something else because I mean, eight tours in Afghanistan and doing the sort of work you're doing. And this is the part that I think I want people to understand because there's a lot of there's a lot of tough jobs out there, I'm always someone that says that look, military service is honorable, but not all military service is the same. And there are certain jobs which put you into unique environments. So, for instance, you talk about tier one units, especially when we're talking about CAG, when we're talking about Dev Group, or what is commonly referred to as Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, Ranger units, things like that. A large part of what they're doing is they're closing with killing the enemy, right? That's
yeah,
kill people and break things, right? That's the thing. But you're doing it with, like you said, you're doing it with resources. You're doing it with highly trained individuals. It's very dangerous work, but you typically have a great deal of confidence in the people that you're working with. The job that you were doing was one where you were still running into those situations where you're finding yourself, in the occasional firefight, even if that wasn't the purpose of a particular job. You're still, because you're finding dangerous situations, but you were operating in an environment where it's not like you've got a bunch of guys to your left and your right that you've trained with over time that you're now going on to combat operations with, where you go in, execute the target, and then move out. You're having to immerse yourself into an environment where if you screw up, you're probably done, right? You're probably done because it's that support chain that you talked about was not there to get you out of a bad situation. You were expected to go into those bad situations in order to facilitate the sort of environment that could allow for follow-on operations. And I could only imagine the amount of trust and camaraderie you had to build with Aziz. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like?
yeah. I mean, look, Aziz was not only my teammate, he became my friend because we spent so much time. I spent more time with him than any of my guys I was in my command. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, we lived. I didn't go when we were not operating those mountains. I went back to his home. I stayed at his home,
Yeah.
and he saved my life multiple times. Three times specifically in kinetic combat and then probably every day, like don't walk there, don't eat that, don't talk to that person. If you talk right now,
Yeah.
they're going to kill us. And there's one moment that we were in a place called Batakut, Afghanistan. We were actually the command with number 6. So if you think the top 10 list, this guy was number 6. We were there for like a few weeks, building an operation. It was people think of Afghanistan as like desert. This is like high mountain, Colorado, granite,
Yeah.
granite rocks, pine trees, uh, a lot of farming community. It's just a farming community, and we parked in these pine trees, and we walked across this field. And I remember being like irritated because it was so cold. It was like, I mean, it was definitely sub-zero, wind blowing, like just frozen mud, like tromping through this frozen mud. And we get to the end of this field, and there's this old man sitting there. I've been to Afghanistan. I know you have, but
Oh, I haven't.
you haven't. Okay, Iraq.
I was Iraq. Yeah.
Yeah,
2 tours in Iraq,
I
but
thought
not
you did both.
Afghanistan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, in Afghanistan, I'm sure in Iraq too. You got these guys that just squat in the corner, right? They're like freezing cold, and he's just like squatting on the squatting out there. And he starts talking to Aziz, and he said, "The Taliban is right here in this area, like imminently in this area, and they're looking for the foreigner," which was me. And so he's like,
Mhm.
"Hey, brother, we have to go." And so we start walking back across this field, and we're about 100 yards away from the road, and the 3 trucks drive behind us, and I mean, very bold, flying Taliban flags, so they didn't care. Uh, PKMs on the top. All the guys are piled in the truck, AK-47s, RPGs, and they hit the brakes and back up, and they get out, they jump out the truck, and it's like 20 to 30 of them. It's me and Aziz, and we have no radio, AKS, AK-47, some magazines in our bag, hand grenades in our bag, but that's it. And we're in this field, and we're talking about what we're gonna do. We're talking about, hey, if we have to move off this field, this is where we're going. I'm going to tree line, Australian peel, like a lateral, or
Yep.
Australian peel, like bounding Overwatch off this field. That's what we're gonna do. But I'm like, but they're not gonna do anything because one, the Taliban doesn't just randomly kill people that they don't know who they are. They need permission. They want to know who they are. They can't drive in this field because it's muddy, and we're like 100 yards away. So I thought we were good. I remember just being like super calm, and then I heard a shot like pop over our head. I don't know if I heard a gun. Tell the story a couple of times now. The gun fire first, so the shot go over our head. But
Yeah.
right, first I heard them say
Yeah.
"posh," which means stop, and
Yeah.
then they shot. And when they shot, I knew in that moment I had the decision to make. Like, if we ran, they were just gonna shoot us, right? If we gave up and comply with them, they're either gonna kill us or, I mean, you talk about like being killed like any moment. That's the good scenario, and being my
Yeah.
but being captured and what would happen after that, it would be horrific. So, not gonna give up. And so the only option in my mind in that moment, like, and you're not really having time to think, is just to turn and fight. And I just did an about face and raised my rifle. And the first person I saw, like this image just kind of shoved in my mind. Like the first person I saw was this guy. He's the red Hilux pickup truck. He's standing next to the passenger door, and he's had his AK-47 at port arms. He's just the first person I saw. And I about face, raised my rifle, and I fired 2 rounds center mass. And I thought I missed him because the window blew out behind him,
Yeah.
and it's like 100 yards away. EOTech, not on the AK-47. So I should have hit him. So I thought I missed him, but then he fell, and I think he like went back and hit the window and fell, or the rounds went through him. But I immediately expected like onslaught of gunfire. But I think it shocked the guys, the Taliban guys, because they didn't think we would fight. So they actually ran behind the vehicle to get cover. And then when they did, they went between the vehicles. So it was like a convergent point where they all went. So I just started emptying my magazine in that convergent point where they're running, and yelled for Aziz to move. And we initiated that bounding. And as we're bounding, for those that know about bounding, right, a couple of things happen. One, I'm covering my guy to move. But two, and it's an important part of the story, the reason he's not shooting while he's moving is so I can draw the fire to me. In your gunfight, you shoot at what's shooting at you, right? So I
Yeah.
want to draw the fire. So he don't want to move and shoot. He just wants to not shoot. So all the fire's being drawn to me. And so Aziz sets, he starts firing. I bound past him, and we're doing that lateral or straight off the battlefield, off the large open danger battlefield. But what Aziz did was, as we're moving, uh, I'm covering for Aziz. I'm shooting, and he's moving, and he stops. And I remember thinking, like, it caught in my peripherals. He stopped and he raised his weapon. I'm like, what is he doing? Like, why is he doing it? He's supposed to be moving. I'm supposed to be drawing fire to me. He'd seen something I didn't. He saw a guy coming up with the RPG, which, because of that method, right? Because that fire's gonna be directed towards me. he knew that that RPG would have went towards me. He stopped,
Yeah.
exposed himself, and shot that guy before the rocket went off and saved my life. And, 100 yards, he certainly exposed himself to do that.
Mhm.
And when I seen what happened, the tactics went out the window, and I just yelled like, "Run!" We just
Yeah.
ran into the tree line, and we got off, and we got in our truck, and we went back to the safe house and waited a little bit. Called the command because we had in the safe house. We had a mechanism to call the command and let them know what happened. Gave a debrief. They brought CI on the phone on the line, and we talked to the counter intel guys, and they were like, "Hey, is the operation compromised, or was this like chance contact?" And we kind of established that it wasn't compromised. Aziz was like, "Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think these guys are on to anybody. They just seen a foreigner in the area and they were looking for him." And so the op went on, and the command came in and didn't capture but killed number six because it was
Wow.
Aziz that made the call. And man, this guy's got congressional recognition. First Afghan I know to get rest guys on the House floor for the rescue of four SEALs that he and I went and get these four team guys that were caught in Taliban village. Didn't only get those four team guys out and saved their life, but also protected the operation from being compromised and continued on. The operation continued. So he's like one of the most amazing human beings. And when I uh, was not in the mountains with him, I was at his home. His wife Hafsa
Yeah.
made our first warm meal. I was there when Mashoud, his oldest son and daughter, was born, and I held him as babies. So he's family to me,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
the honor. Like one of the biggest honors I had in that job was to be able to work shoulder to shoulder with Aziz.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about True Classic because this is gift giving season, and some of you are probably wondering, what do you get for the man in your life? Well, I'm gonna tell you what my wife got me, and that was True Classic. She started off with the t-shirts. That was the gateway apparel into the larger True Classic universe. I'm gonna tell you why I loved these things. Is because when I was going to the gym, especially when you're first getting back into the gym, right? Like you want to feel like you're getting results. And when I wore like a regular t-shirt, I felt like I was swimming in it, right? Just didn't feel. And then all of a sudden I wear these True Classics. And it's not like you're wearing your little sister's t-shirt, right? No. You're wearing a t-shirt that's finally meant for you. Finally meant for a man's body, right? And as you start to go into that gym and you start to see the results, well, let's just say that True Classic hugs all the parts of your upper torso it's supposed to, while ignoring parts of your torso that you are still working on, right? That's the magic of True Classic. So I got to tell you, it got me back into the gym more consistently. I love these shirts. I love their new set of fitness wear because, again, it's just good. It makes you feel good. It fits right. It looks good. I'm telling you, ladies, you're going to like your man in these shirts, and you're going to like the result of him going to the gym more because he's wearing these shirts. So go to trueclassic.com/Nick and go ahead and look at some of the bundles they offer because it's great. And then once you get into some of that fitness gear, you can go into some of the button downs, the jeans, the shorts, the hoodies, everything else they got. Really good quality stuff. trueclassic.com. Nick. Well, and I mean, speaking of that, obviously when and we actually one of the ways I kind of heard about you is because we knew some similar people when when Biden very, very abruptly, shut down Afghanistan. We knew some of the same people trying to get people out, trying to work on get people over there in order to assist. And you were one of the guys. You were one of the guys that it's not as if the U.S. government or the State Department or the DOD were facilitating any of this, but you were one of the guys that went over and said, "I'm getting my friends out."
Yeah, it was
Um,
not even a decision to make. I mean, look,
yeah,
I think the movie The Covenant, the guy says it. I can't even describe it better than the guy said it in the movie. It was like a hook inside of me. Like
yeah.
there was like I was like I
Well,
have to like there was so compelled like we have to get.
but I want people to understand. I know a little something about this, not simply because I know some of the guys that were facilitating going over there. This was not something where you just, oh, okay, I'll book a plane ticket.
Right now.
It was pretty tough because for a while there, and the reason why I know that is because I was working with some people. We were facilitating the appropriate visas. We were planning flights. All that stuff was going. And then it all shut down. There was no way to get in unless you were going to go into Pakistan. And then I knew some guys that tried to go in through Tajikistan, and that ended up being a complete. In fact, not only was the U.S. government not assisting or at least turning a blind eye to people that were going in there and trying to save people, they were actively working to prevent it or thwart guys because I knew guys that had gotten a good portion of the way and again, the Biden administration was actually working with other governments to try to prevent them from being able to go in and get people.
Very much so.
So
Well,
yeah, so can you tell us a little? So you do your 8 tours in Afghanistan. You're done. There's a lot of other stuff that happens in between that and this, and I do want to touch on that. But
yeah.
while we're talking about Aziz, can you tell us a little bit about what you did to have to go, you and others, to go over there and not only get Aziz, but to help get a lot of other people out?
Yeah. So what I did was I made a decision to go get Aziz, and then what my friends did was agreed to follow me on that wild idea when I called and asked for help. I've got about put up a team of about ultimately about 12 special operations veterans. A female named Sarah Verardo helped, who non-military, but her husband's a catastrophically wounded guy. Helped logistically pull some stuff together. Uh, and then what God did was orchestrate an absolute miracle using a bunch of boneheads like us. Because of the things that you said, like everything that we tried to do was absolute impossibility that the White House and State Department from President Biden, Secretary Blinken was working actively against us. And the NEO operation, non-combatant evacuation operation, was taken from the Department of Defense and given to the Secretary Blinken at the State Department, which was intentional,
Nuts.
catastrophic decision to prevent the U.S. military from rescuing Americans and civilians during the evacuation. They closed Bagram Air Force Base. They secured the civilian airport, Hamid Karzai International Airport. So that's where evacuation was happening. In the military, because of that NEO operation handover, the State Department was not allowing our U.S. military to go evacuate civilians, including our own embassy. And so the outer perimeter of the HKI airport was given to the Taliban. And the White House is saying, "Hey, if you want to leave, just go to airport." Well, some 20-year-old aid worker or a ministry missionary or English teacher or doctor is not going to go show her blue passport to the Taliban who's executing people in the streets. And
Yeah.
so it's a very complicated situation. And so if you're not letting the military go out and rescue people, why are you going to let a bunch of veteran civilians go out and rescue people? And so that's what we're trying to do. So we were looking at other options, but we thought first, let's see if we could get permission to go in HKIA. We already knew the answer would probably be no. And so we put in a request to the Joint Chiefs, and the answer was no. However, Sarah Verardo used her connections and got in touch with General Milley. And for whatever reason, I always joke a lot and say maybe she has pictures of him in high heels or something. Whatever reason, General Milley gave our group, the only group we were giving that to, permission to go in HKIA and do civilian evacuations there and leave the wire. And so that in itself is a miracle. I always say, like, I'm not smart enough, logistically capable enough, networked enough to pull off the miracle that happened. God orchestrated a series of miracles, and that was the first one. The second one was that now we could bring people. I could go out and rescue people. We could bring them on HKIA, but we have to be able to move them out of the country without a visa because these are people that are stuck
Yeah.
on visas, which is human trafficking, right? And unless you're in Laredo, Texas, you can't go to
Yeah.
that country
Yeah.
without a
You
visa,
can't do that.
right?
Yeah.
So you can't do that. So I had to
Yeah,
get
but
permission.
Biden is very much against human trafficking when it's saving people from
Right,
Afghanistan, but
right.
not
I
so
always
much when it's illegally coming into the United States. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, we had to get a country that would accept them. And that was a race because the State Department was actively going to countries and saying, do not take humanitarian. So we had an audience with the royal family of the United Arab Emirates, and I got on the phone with them, gave an hour-long briefing. I had a couple of congressmen and US senators for clout on the phone with me, and I briefed for like an hour, expected them to say no. They came back and said, absolutely, we'll take them. We have a humanitarian center. We'll give you a C-17 plane to do a load. If you fill that one up, we'll give you a second one. And at that moment, I realized we have uh, access and placement. We have
Yeah.
capability. We have a willing group of very capable people to pull this off. We could rescue a lot more than Aziz or the 3,000 orphans or all these people that kept coming up. We have ability to really make an impact. But this is going to cost not $1,000, millions of dollars. And this is all
Yeah.
in three. This decision making was in a 3-day period. And I got a random call from Glenn Beck. I say random, I know Glenn Beck, but he called me up and said, "Hey, Chad, I heard you're doing something in Afghanistan. I went on the radio to raise a few $1,000s. So far, 26 million's come in. Ultimately over like 46 million came in." He's like, "I don't know what to do with it. Like, we want to raise money to help, but I'm like, I know exactly what we're gonna do with it. We're gonna start chartering aircraft." And so Mercury
Yeah.
One, Mighty Oaks Foundation, Sarah the Independence Fund, we formed the Save Our Allies Coalition. Eventually, we made an organization out of it. I'm not part of it now, but Sarah and Tim and all of them still run it. And Nick, they still also run the Save Our Allies. But we use that to go in. rescue Aziz, his wife and 6 kids, and ultimately 17,000 people. And kind of into it
Wow.
myself and Dennis Price, going into Tajikistan. And literally for 10 days, we swam across the Panjshir River. Like the
Yeah.
Chinese military, Taliban, the Russians were there, and build routes out for the women and children of the resistance fighters.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah. No, that's incredible. That's incredible. Um, there's another thing I want to pivot a little bit, but I definitely I appreciate you sharing that because I want people to understand what actually was going on in that time because I feel like I feel like there's a whole history of that that needs to be understood and get out there to people because it is one of those it is one of those worst and best moments for America. Worst with respect to foreign policy, defense policy, and what the Biden administration did, but absolutely incredible when you hear about the stories of people who just on their own initiative said, "No, we're not going to allow this." And it's one of the things I love the most about just Americans in general. It's this idea that okay, you've you've made your rule, but there is an honor, there's a debt of honor that needs to be repaid, and it will be repaid. You can either stand in my way or you can get out of it, but it's going to be repaid. And you guys did that in a way that was just phenomenal. Um, when you got out of the military, we you talked a little bit about this about kind of like that first moment being over Afghanistan and kind of coming to that realization or not realization, but the false understanding that you were either going to have to choose to be a man of faith or a warrior, and you looked at the things that you were going to have to do, and you looked at the examples that you've been given of what a Christian man was, and you said these two are not compatible. Not because you wanted to do anything bad or dishonorable, but quite the opposite. You wanted to do something honorable. You wanted to serve faithfully, but you were going to serve in situations where you were going to have to make second decisions, and people were going to die
and that to be
based
violent.
off of this.
Yeah, to be
Yes,
violent about a lot of
yeah,
people manipulate as AFO. You're lying,
yeah,
not just bad people, like manipulating people, putting people in danger. And again, like there's
mhm,
times you're gonna have to be like lethal. Like
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so I mean, 8 tours of that, right? 8 tours of doing that, and, I mean, look, you've been married for 28 years, right? So, like, you're married, you have kids, and you're having to do that with one part of your life, and then you're having to come home and try to be a husband, try to be a father, growing up in an environment where you didn't have, as proud as you are of your father's service, you didn't have a dad that was able to, instruct you in the way that you should go, and so what was that? I mean, this is something you talk about that has had an amazing impact on a lot of people on the experience of, you know, being the very picture of what a lot of us envision masculinity is with respect to the warrior, and then trying to also be a husband and a father and all of those other things. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience from, military to family life?
yeah. So I mean, just being in Afghanistan, being in that operation environment, it's a very intense environment, and so you just operate at this level, that's tempo of like intensity, and then in my job, and credit to all the guys that have done super long deployments. My deployments were short, like 3 months to 6 months, but there was a pretty rapid rotation. So when I say eight
Yeah.
deployments, I didn't do these 12, 15-month deployments, but it's very high intensity. So you're just kind of amped up the whole time. And it's kind of this war culture, like Viking war culture mentality at my command because of Roberts Ridge. Everybody knows that story. Roberts was like, fell out of the helicopter and was killed by the Taliban. He had fired every round. They killed him, cut his junk off, shoved it in his mouth. And the command was like, oh, that's the rules we're playing, like game on. And so it's just like this kind of ingrained like mentality at the command. And it's very easy to buy into. Everybody just super intense. In that intensity, when you leave Afghanistan and go back home to go be a husband and father and Mr. Rogers, the friendly neighbor, like you can't just flip that switch. You're still like, I was still this angry, intense guy. And but people don't know me, like I'm highly capable of being violent, but actually I'm a very like compassionate, kind human being. I have like a really gentle spirit and a big heart. And so my wife and kids were not accustomed to that. They're very accustomed to kind of this kind of real stoic personality that I have. And so now I'm coming home and being like a lunatic, like I'm punching holes in the wall, slamming doors, breaking things, yelling at them like a Marine Corps drill instructor. Like I'm just like totally out of control. And so they're like, what the heck is going on? And I mean, I always share this story. I hate sharing it, but it's like one of the most profound like ways for me to explain it is me coming home to my little girl's birthday, and She didn't like the icing on her cake, like something so simple. And I picked up my little girl's birthday cake and threw it against the wall and destroyed my little girl's birthday. And that's just like one example of like how I was behaving. And I remember, and even in that moment, like what kind of dad behaves that way? Like what kind of person behaves that way? What kind of dad like treats their daughter like that on their birthday? And but I would always like justify it. Like, yeah, that was a big reaction, but she doesn't even appreciate a birthday cake. Some little girl in Afghanistan will never see a birthday cake
Yeah.
in her life. All she's worried about is not getting raped by a 50-year-old man, being forced married at 9 years old, and being sexually enslaved the rest of her life. And you worried about a birthday cake? Like everybody's an idiot. So I would just justify that behavior. And when I realized that it didn't fit, instead of correcting that behavior, I just distanced myself. And that distancing myself allowed me to just prolong getting well, and then that anger and frustration manifest in these physiological symptoms. My arms would go numb. My throat would feel like it was swelling shut. I feel like I couldn't breathe. Like these are signs of panic attacks. And when I recognized that was starting to happen to me, there was no way I was ever going to tell any of the guys I worked with, because they would have peered me out. Like, I would have thought if someone was dealing with that, they were weak. And I knew if they knew I was dealing with that, they would think I was weak. And it's a very, everybody's so super close to those units. But as soon as you like, or a weak link, you're like cast aside. It's
Yeah.
very competitive environment. It doesn't matter how much you're loved, and that's a good thing and that's a bad thing.
Mhm.
But that was the reality. So I didn't say anything. I just pushed it down, figured I could grind it out. I had moments in combat to where I was like having what's called disassociation, where you feel like your mind's actually separate from your body. It almost feels like you're seeing yourself in third party, which actually what's really happening is you're not present in that moment. You're
Mhm.
you're recollecting, and
Mhm.
which is obviously very dangerous to be operating that way. And then we had a compromise on our operation. One of our Afghans from a OGA, like CIA program,
Yeah.
I slept in, I lived on the side of mountains with, like me, him, and Aziz were like operated together, just the three of us before. And he flipped to the Taliban. 12 of our teammates were captured and killed, two Americans and 10 Afghans. And you may not, people listening may not think the Afghans was as big of a deal, but these are the guys I lived with, that lived in
Yeah.
homes, played
Yeah.
soccer with their kids, ate dinner with their families. Like I love these guys, and they loved me, and I would have died for them, and they would have died for me. And I do believe that, in fact, they did die for me. And so the wheels really start to come off at that time. The consequence of that was a V bid being driven in our house because our locations were compromised to kill me and my friends. A vehicle borne ID device leveled our house. Aziz's family was compromised. We had to move his family. I was in a neighboring country. I can't say which one. The Pentagon redacted it in my book,
Mhm.
but it's pretty easy to do the math. And their intelligence agency, their equivalent of the CIA, caught me, abducted me, very heavily interrogated me, and we still kept operating. So eventually, I won't go into all of it because for sake of time, but eventually I come home, I'm diagnosed with PTSD, dealing with debilitating panic attacks, anxiety, depression, completely embarrassed and ashamed. And I go in this 3-year downward spiral that led to me nearly becoming another suicide statistic. And, just at this rock bottom point in my life.
So what was the turnaround point?
Turnaround point was, me and my wife had filed for divorce. We separated. We were living in two separate homes, and I had this big fight on strike force. During this downward spiral was when I had the
Yeah.
highest productivity as an athlete, because that's what I dove back into. I was already fighting professionally inside the military. Eventually, I amassed an 18-2 professional record. But during this time,
Yeah. 8 wait, and by the way, so everyone knows, 18-2 is 17 wins by submission.
yes,
Right? We're not talking about a lot of decisions here.
yeah, I love
Like,
jiu-jitsu. That's a
geez.
great for a jiu-jitsu guy. That's a cool thing.
Yeah.
Submitting guys. I always say, people like, you love MMA. I'm like, I hate MMA. I like to submit MMA fighters with. Yeah. So you always say to be antagonistic
Yeah.
fighting, but yeah, I want.
So you're at the height of all this. So is was it? I mean, look, I love MMA. I love jujitsu and boxing. All it is. Was this part of the way that you looked as trying to take all of the anger and frustration and force it into something that was like positive?
Yeah, it was. It wasn't like a. I'm never, even in that moment, I was never like a. I'm gonna let my anger and aggression out by fighting
Yeah.
people. I always been super composed. So a very
Yeah.
composed fighter. I'm never fight emotionally. Rolling up on a target in Afghanistan, or stepping into a cage. The more composed you are, the better you're going to perform. So I've always maintained that level of composure, which is kind of hypocritical and ironic that I could do that. I couldn't do that at home when my family was, but I could do that in a cage before I fought MMA. Like it's embarrassing to say, but that's the truth. But I had won this while we were separated. I won this. I was fighting in Strike Force, this big fight in the Showtime. Strike Force was owned by the UFC at the time. it was a big event. Like me and Tim Kennedy were sponsored by Ranger Up at the time, and we both fought. He fought Jacare, I fought Humberto de Leon, and I won this fight. And while my hand was raised, I remember everybody cheering. I was 16-0 at the time. That put me in rank number 6 in the world. And like I remember while everybody was cheering, like I had this kind of silent moment to myself, like 10,000 people screaming, like it's loud and kind of deafening. But I remember I had this moment that like everything got quiet, and I remember thinking like all these people here are screaming. Not one of them was my wife, who had been in my fights before, and I just fought so hard to win this, stupid win on my record. Which I love the sport, but in contrast, right, I fought so hard to win a stupid win on my record, but meanwhile, I'm not fighting my wife and my kids were devastated. And so after that fight was over, I had been separated for like 3 months. I just probably left that ring with my head held down. I stopped in at Buffalo Wild Wings to check in for an after fight party because Ranger Up and threw like after fight party for me and Tim. And then I went to my apartment and I laid in my bed and my mind was spinning and I was thinking of all the people that I blamed in my life and everyone's an idiot. And I came to this realization like, man, yeah, people in the military, my dad, my wife, and not understanding. There's a lot of idiots that have blamed everyone, but that common denominator is me. And when I came to that conclusion, I thought um, I'm the problem. If I remove myself from the situation, everything's gonna be better for the people I love. And so I didn't want to. I never wanted to like take my life out of like escaping pain or anything like that. But it was just like, feel like a real rational thing. Like maybe my family would be sad without me, but they'll be better off. Like maybe they sad, but but they'd be better off. And so I had really believed that in a moment. And I know that a lot of your listeners probably know, but that same hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of over 20, uh, probably the reality, probably over 40 of our military warriors every single day. Right? Maybe my family would be sad without me, but they'd be better off. And I decided to take my life. And I had a Glock 22 pistol, a 40 caliber pistol, and I would sit in my closet in my apartment, and I put my family pictures on the floor around me, I would put the gun to my head and go to pull a trigger. But whenever I would try to build up the courage to do that, I believe this is divine, by the way. I'd have this overwhelming like vision of who's going to find me. Someone's gonna hear a gunshot in an apartment. You're not gonna show up somewhere. You're gonna morbidly. You're gonna start stinking. Like someone's eventually gonna find you. And the only other person besides me that had a key to my apartment was my oldest son, Hunter, and thought of my son finding me that way. And I also heard a statistic that 1 in 3 children from a parent that commits suicide will do it as well.
Wow.
And that thought was in my head, and I thought, man, I can't let my son be part of finding me that way. It was enough to pump the brakes, but I was still in such a dark place that that day or the next day I'd be back at it again. And there was a morning I was in that closet. I had that pistol in my hand. I didn't have it to my head. I just had it in my hand. I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't going to answer it. When I heard Kathy's voice, my wife Kathy's voice, announce herself, she would have never came to my apartment. She definitely would not came to my closet. But for some reason, I like panicked and I felt the need. I hid that pistol under a blanket. And then it sounds crazy and twisted, but I was so mad that she had interrupted me killing myself that I just like beeline for the door, like just live it. And I opened the door and I started yelling at her like to leave, and she wouldn't leave.
Mm.
And usually I'm the calm person. She's not very calm in an argument. She's like so calm, and I was like trying to get her to leave, and she just wouldn't leave. I'm ashamed to say this because I hate domestic violence, or especially men ever putting their hands on a woman. I would never do that to my wife, but so I wouldn't put my hands on her, but I ripped her purse out of her hand and I threw it over the third floor balcony because I just wanted her to leave. And her stuff went everywhere. Like I said, I'm super embarrassing to say, but I think it's important to be honest,
Yeah.
transparent about that. And she just would not leave, even with her purse laying in the parking lot. Her stuff's everywhere, and she asked me a question in a moment that calmly, like that question, it really radically changed my life and saved my life in that day. She's like, "How could you do everything that I've seen you do and have the discipline to do everything I've seen you do?" Now you got to remember, we met when she was 17 and 18. She saw me being a
Yeah.
recon marine, the schools, the training, the deployments, the workups,
Yep.
going on. I mean, the command had to brief the wives on what we did so they wouldn't say anything stupid over the phone. Like all the stuff that she had to, and then cutting weight for fights. Like I lose like 35 pounds making weight for fights, like the discipline to train for these fights. She's seen all this stuff professionally. She's like, how could you do all of that? And when it comes to your family, you'll quit. And there's no more soul cutting word to me than to be called the quitter, right? And she was absolutely right. I've been successful at professional things when it came to the most important things, like being a husband, being a father, being a young 17-year-old kid that raised his hand on those yellow footprints and made a commitment to do something important. Quitting all those things, including my will to live. And I'm a pretty radical decision maker. And so I made a decision to get back in the fight. Uh, I knew, though, that I couldn't do it alone. And I knew I couldn't do it with the people I surrounded myself by. And so I asked my wife, "Is there someone at this church you go to?" Because she had started going to this church while we were separated. "Is there someone at this church you're going to that could help hold me accountable to this decision?" And there was a guy on call who was never wasn't an MMA fighter or a military guy. He was just a local business owner, elder at the church on call, named Steve Toth, and met him at Starbucks coffee shop. I had a perfect plan of how I was going to fix my life. It was a 5 paragraph order. Uh, it
Yeah.
was really good. And
Yeah, situation, mission, execution.
yeah, there's a Shmiak in there. But man, I like it shows how manipulative it was because my plan was I'm gonna do a really good plan and I'm gonna show it to this guy. He's gonna show it to Kathy, and she's gonna know I'm serious. And so she'll sweep everything under the rug, get a fresh start. That's how guys think. And the women listening, like I know better now, but that's what we think, right? So,
Yeah.
but when I showed him this, he's like such an impatient guy. He didn't even look at it. He didn't even look at it or read it or anything. He just slid it back over to me and told me I was gonna fail. And I remember being like really offended, like, what do you mean I'm going to fail? Like, he's like, you're going to right back where you are. And he tapped on the paper. He said, this plan doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm not going to let you waste mine. And, that
Wow.
was exactly what I needed to hear because at that moment, I had tried everything. I've been on medications from the VA, from civilian doctors. I've been through VA programs. I went through the civilian program with Dr. Phil. Like, been through all these programs that people sent me through. I had professional success, I had financial success, I had egotistical accolades built back up. Some of those things are good and some of those things are bad, but none of those things had changed my situation. We have a saying,
Mhm.
in fact, at Mighty Oaks Foundation, our foundation, that's based off of this moment. If what you're doing isn't working, then why not try something different? Everything I
Mhm.
tried didn't work. It was time for me to try something different. And while I knew I had an inventory of my life looking back, it was standing on that tarmac at Bagram Air Force Base, making the decision to take that faith pillar and put it on a shelf and say I could do that when I get older, and foregoing that. That's what left a giant hole in my heart. That's what filled me with hate and rage and anger and bitterness, and that darkness took over me and led me down this path away from biblical manhood, away from the life I was created to live, and just to start to destroy me and corrode me. And I knew all along that that was the missing piece. And I always say when I'm speaking to troops, there's 4 pillars. Like if you had a 4 legged stool and one was mind, body, social, and spirit, like most of us could have a strong enough stool to where it'll stay erect by itself. But as soon as you put weight in it, if one of those legs are weak, it'll come crashing down and expose that weak one. And as I look back at my life, I knew the weak one was the one that I broke was my spiritual pillar. And I figured it was kind of like, what do I have to lose at that moment? I tried everything else. What do I have to lose besides giving this guy a chance? So I surrendered my
Yeah.
life to Christ. Didn't really even know what it meant at the time. And for a year after that, he discipled me for a year in biblical living. And this is where it really speaks into what you want to talk about today is the biblical manhood or masculinity. What it really defined for me was this mentorship or discipleship that happened for years is a retrospective looking back and saying all these bad things that happened to me in my childhood, burying 15 friends over my 8 deployments from Afghanistan. I remember Foster Harrington when he died. We had served together for 10 years. He was like served at my wedding, was there all through my kids were born. He was like my best friend, and I was remember being so pissed, like when he like, and it's so angry, like all these bad things that happened to me. As bad as those things were, those things did not lead me to be in a closet, I'm a pistol man. What led me there were the
Mhm.
choices I made in response to those things. And I realized I never lost the ability to control the choices I made in my life. I was just making bad ones. And so the Bible for me gave me a manual, a blueprint to make better choices. And people say all the time, life doesn't come with a handbook. It does. We just don't read it, right?
Mhm.
And like you buy that IKEA furniture, and Kathy will bring it home, and I'll put it together with just looking at the cover box. I
Yeah.
never read the
Yeah, that's
instructions,
me.
and there's like 4 extra piece of wood and some extra screws, and I'm like,
Yeah.
thing's freaking crap. It's like wobbly and shaky. Like you didn't read the instructions. And our life sometimes
Yeah.
we're like our life's like crap. Like man, why is life like this? Why I got dealt such a bad hand? It's no, we didn't read the handbook. So yeah, I still had anxiety at times. I still had depression. I still got angry. But when I did, I had a handbook to go read and make very
Yeah.
intentional choices to align my life with being the man that God created me to be, and recalibrate my life. And that intentionality and deliberateness in the biblical manhood brought restoration into my life. It brought hope into me that I never even had before, to be honest with you. And
Mhm.
ultimately, it gave me purpose. And for me, like when you talk about manhood and biblical,
Yeah.
it's because we were created to have purpose. I don't believe the veteran crisis is because of 20 years of war. I believe that 20 years of war gave people mission and purpose and clarity and felt focus. And now you take that away from them, and all they have is that identity and that job, which is great. Right? You should be proud that you were a Green Beret. I'm proud that I was a recon Marine. But our identity is tied to that. When it's taken away, you have no mission and purpose, and you feel like there's no
Yeah.
reason to live anymore. And so the Bible and biblical living gave me a mission and purpose, and that purpose manifested for me in this deep burden that God put in my heart to share that message with others, and
Yeah.
that led to me founding the Mighty Oaks Foundation and just paying it forward. It was simply a pay it forward method, and man, now I've been able to speak to over 500,000 troops. We do $8 million a year in programming for service members, and it's just been a phenomenal experience of just finding that hope, finding the restoration for myself, and then finding a new purpose that I found for me, and then leading others, not just to hope and restoration, but leading others to find their purpose as well and pay it forward as well.
Well, once again, ladies and gentlemen, it's gift giving season. And if you want to give a gift, especially to someone whose house you might be visiting, allow me to recommend Good Ranchers. That's right. Good Ranchers is not just a great company that produces an incredible product. And of course, we're a little bit biased because they support the show, but we use Good Ranchers. I mean, like consistently. Tina's on a carnivore diet right now, which means we eat a lot of steak in the Freitas household, and we are never disappointed with Good Ranchers. But it's not just steak. They've got wild-caught seafood, they've got poultry, they've got pork, and all of it's delicious. And if you go to goodranchers.com and use my special code Nick right now, not only are you going to get the excellent deals they already offer for quality products, but they're going to offer you a free add-on to any box that you order. You can choose from chicken breast, you can choose from ground beef, you can choose from salmon, or you can choose bacon, which you can use to wrap everything else in that delicious box that they're going to send you. So go to goodranchers.com, use the promo code Nick, get yourself that deal. I am promising you, you're not going to be disappointed. What's better? And again, makes for an excellent gift, one that you might be able to partake of when you go over to that house. So goodranchers.com, use promo code Nick, go check them out. So I think it's interesting that you point this out, because this is something that I feel like, and it's interesting because some of the most intriguing conversations taken about it are taking actually place in the what you might call the secular world, whether it's like Jordan Peterson or maybe Eric Weinstein or something like that, where you're having guys that are not necessarily committed to the faith but are starting to talk. Like it blew my mind the other day when Richard Dawkins came out and said, "Oh yeah, I want to live in a Christian culture." It's like, well, geez, Richard, do you think maybe you think there might be something to that beyond just you like pretty cathedrals and doing to others? But it goes to this idea of meaning and purpose, because I think you're right. We had Daniel Gate on a while back, and Daniel Gate had worked in the White House, had been a secretary here in Virginia. He had lost a leg in Iraq, still completed his military service and has done a lot of work. And that theme keeps coming up, whether I'm talking about veterans, whether I'm talking about kind of the problem within the culture, whether I'm talking about young men just kind of feeling like lost. That theme keeps coming up, is that we don't need another pill. And a lot of times we don't need a cry session, although there's nothing wrong with being able to be around, people that you respect and that you admire, and being able to get things off your chest in a way that is desperately needed at times. But it's like, man, give us meaning, give us purpose, because we find our identity in it.
Yeah.
And the thing that I came to grips with was that there was even times where I was finding my meaning, my purpose. I was finding my identity and meaning and purpose in things that were not in and of themselves bad, being a Green Beret, even being a husband or being a father. But I really came to this conclusion that, okay, but there'll be a time where I'm not a Green Beret anymore. Mm-hmm. There could be, as horrific as this is in my own mind, but when I'm not a father or when I'm not a husband, does that mean I'm nothing anymore? Does that mean I'm nothing at that point?
Yeah.
And it was really coming to that conclusion that no, the identity that cannot be taken away from me under any circumstances is my identity in Christ.
Yep.
It cannot be taken away. And this is the part that's really important. If I don't properly recognize that is the foundation upon which my identity is built, I can't be the soldier, the father, the husband that I'm called to be. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm saying, okay, my identity is I'm a husband and a father, well, what does that mean? Where am I taking advice from what it means to being a husband and a father? Right? What does it mean for being a soldier? What's that rooted in? What's the truth? What's it rooted in? And it was that moment where it's like, okay, it's not that I have to get my identity in Christ to the exclusion of these other things. it's that to be the things that, to be the pinnacle of what I should be in these areas, I have to first get my identity here. And it's amazing how when that realization strikes, everything else seems to line up. And it doesn't mean you're perfect at it. Like you said, like I cannot, I always say I could write a lot more about all the things that I got wrong, did wrong, should have done better the whole day than I could any of the things that I actually got right in life. But that one moment always gives me that it's the truth, right? And that's what I realized I was looking for. I wasn't just looking for an identity. I was looking for my true identity. Mm. And it's amazing how once you find that, it becomes easier to spot where you're doing it wrong.
Everything changed for me. Like, one of my favorite quotes is Mark Twain. He says the two most important days in a person's life are the day that they're born and the day they find out why. And for me, when Steve Toth introduced me to my relationship with Christ, and I was able to identify the life I was created to live, and ultimately my purpose, that's the why, right? It was like a fire was lit inside. It was like I was dying of cancer and someone gave me the cure. Like I didn't want to share it. I had to, and it really helped me to identify like what my true purpose was, and what my identity was. Was my identity being a recon Marine? No. Was it being a JSOC? No. It was being even a husband and a father. No, my identity wasn't that. My identity was being a child of God, and ultimately, I believe if I can refine what I believe God created me to do, it's to serve others. And so if I lost my legs tomorrow, I would still find a way to serve others. And the Bible is pretty clear in this. People say, "What's the meaning of life?" That's kind of one of the biggest questions, right? What's the meaning of life? And no one seems to have the answer for it. But the answer is pretty clear right in the Bible. Revelations 4:11 says, "For thy pleasure they are and they were created." We were created to please God. What's the meaning of life? It's for us to please God. And no matter what happens to me in my life, physical injury, mental injury, I still have the ability and capability to please God through my actions every day, and that's my purpose. And so everything I do, it goes in the equation of everything. I get asked to do all kind of things. I'm sure you do too, and I always bring in the equation. Does this honor God? Am I going to please God through this? Because the Bible says again, "For thy pleasure, they are and they were created." I was created to please God. So is this thing I'm going to do going to please God? No, okay, I'm not doing it.
So let me ask you this: as we're talking about and as we're talking about a culture which has, in many respects, it likes to pretend it hasn't. I've noticed this lately, right? It likes to pretend that it hasn't demonized masculinity or what we might even call traditional masculinity. It likes to pretend because the moment it gets called out, it's like, no, we're not trashing all masculinity. We're just trashing toxic masculinity. And then the definition of what constitutes toxic masculinity changes regularly. I've had people. I remember once I talked about how. I did this funny thing where I said, your daughter doesn't want you to beat up her boyfriend, but she wants to know that you would, and she wants to know that you could. And the context of that is that it was about men. You're supposed to be capable so that you can, if necessary, use violence to defend the people you love from those that would harm them. And this guy gets out, well, this is toxic masculinity. So I share that story just to articulate that no, young men have been at the very least very confused about what it means. And then there's other voices that you see out there that are saying, that are calling out the ridiculous narrative of toxic masculinity, but they're not exchanging it with what I would call an honorable version of masculinity. They're exchanging it for one that is far more hedonistic. It's this idea that you're going to decide, what's good and what's true and what's noble based off of, how it benefits you or how it makes you feel. And then you're going to become powerful and capable and, formidable. And then you're going to go get the things that you want, and you'll show all the people that told you couldn't do it, or you'll show all the people that told you masculinity was bad. My question is it's, and I'm trying to word this correctly. I've looked at a lot of the people that are sharing a narrative that I think is very, very dangerously close to that. And I've looked at a lot of them, and I've thought to myself, man, as much as I disagree with some of what they're saying, they have properly identified a problem. And I don't think that ultimately they're my enemy. That message that they're leaving out, I think, is wrong. But how do we offer a vision of something better to young men that are desperately looking for something right now because they feel like they've just been dumped on and they feel like they've been lied to? And hey, this message sounds pretty good, man. This message sounds pretty good. How do we combat it?
Yeah. Well, I think they've made it black and white, right? Either there's like toxic men or weak men, and there's a lot of in between. First of all, I don't believe anyone is genuine. I think it's very manufactured, genuine when they say they don't want masculinity. Because any one of those people that say that, if they down 911 because they got a group of thugs in their house, they don't
Yeah.
want some 4'10", 90-pound police officer, female police officer showing up at the house. They don't want some dude with a beard and a dress that's some sissy showing up at the house. They don't want a overweight, like
Yeah.
fat slob police officer showing up at the house. They want somebody that looks like a silverback gorilla that's been in the gym, Jack, that knows maybe some cauliflower ears and is gonna come in there and save the day. That's who they want to show up.
Um,
I mean, they would how disappointed would they be if them and their family and like I said, some overweight or some 90-pound girl or some
social worker
yeah,
showed
yeah,
up.
sure. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, that's not who they want to show up. They want a masculine dude or a group of dudes to show up and save the day. So it's very disingenuous, and I don't buy it. And in any real life situation, they would change their mind really quick. They're
Yeah.
just very disconnected to reality because of whatever little bubble that they live in. So I don't buy that. What I do buy in this narrative, and I think what the ultimate they're shooting at and they're missing, is there is a degeneracy in masculine culture in our world, throughout the world, not just American culture, but there really is. There's men that are consumers and not producers. There's a generation of men that think the world revolves around them and everything in the world is for them, and they're going to consume, they're going to use, they're going to abuse, they're going to treat women like meat, and everything is about take, and not producing anything. That to me is toxic. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, there's a lot of men. I don't want to call them men. I'll call them boys who shave that engage in that behavior. Like just 40
Yeah.
year old grown adolescent boys who shave and that's toxic masculinity. Uh, but because you believe in the capability of being violent, because you believe in values and standing up for principles, that's confused with being toxic. It's not. So
Mhm.
I think the narrative is just it's been made so black and white, and they don't even know what target they're shooting at, and I think it's up to guys like us who are willing to have a voice and speak to the differences, but don't just speak and say, "Hey, this is you're either tough or you're a sissy." Let's
Mhm.
talk. Let's call out and talk about and look. I agree with a lot of what Andrew Tate says, but
Mhm.
I do not want my daughter dating Andrew Tate.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
so I John Lovell, I think you know John. Um, we've talked about this too, where it's interesting to me because when I look at like the Fresh and Fit podcast or Andrew and Tristan, or I look at Justin Waller or some of these other guys, um, I have a visceral reaction to the fact that like, dude, I don't agree with what like I agree with your diagnosis of a lot of the problem, but I don't agree. I don't agree with your prescription for it, right? Like there's something missing from it, man. And I feel like a lot of the people that are pushing the emasculation of men and society in general, I don't know why, Chad, but I have this instinct that they really, really want guys like you and I and John and Victor Marks and others. They really want us to get in an all-out fight with Andrew and Tristan and Justin and those guys
right?
because there are fundamental differences. There are fundamental differences. But the thing is that I look at those guys as in some ways people that you brought this up, and I think it's a really important point. They've been given one of two options. You can either be a sheep or you can be a wolf. And they said, I'm not being a sheep,
I'm a
man.
wolf.
I'm not being a sheep.
Yeah.
And there's a different option here. And the different option is the idea that no, like, look, everything you're saying about being strong, about being capable, about being formidable, about, being the sort of person that can judiciously use violence when necessary. All of those things are desperately needed and core attributes of masculinity, but it's got to be for a purpose, and that purpose can't just be for what you want or your friends or to feel admired, right? Or to feel successful. It has to be for something bigger than that and nobler than that. And by that I even mean it has to be for something more noble than even just the people you care about in your immediate circle.
Sure.
There has to be a truth that is worth fighting for, that is truly honorable in and of itself. And that's where I go. Go ahead.
I was saying it's societal. Like you have to be, contribute beyond your sphere.
Yeah, well, and when you talk about that idea of pleasing God, I think there's some people that look at that as, well, that's just another form of subservience. And I look to it, I'm like, well, yeah, because you're always going to serve something.
Yes.
You're always going to serve something. There's no escaping serving something. And if your idea, if your idea of the pinnacle of life is to serve nothing but yourself or your own ambition, I'm going to tell you, man, that's going to lead to a really, really dark place. Because I have, one of the things that I've noticed, and this is one of the reasons why I think marriage is such a sacred covenant. It's not just a legal contract, right? It's a sacred covenant because it gives you a taste of what it is to live for somebody else, whether it's your wife, but not just your wife, your kids, and not just your kids. It's for your marriage, it's for your family. And I think that gives us kind of a physical understanding of what it is to live for God. It gives us like a taste of what that represents. Not that you have to have a wife or a child to be able to serve God. You don't, right? Again, it's one of the beautiful things about that relationship with God is that it exists regardless of anything else. Like it can't be taken away from you. But yeah, I think it's that idea of I want to find it's like I want there to be that message to a generation of young men and young women too. But for right now, I'm speaking specifically to young men. It's this idea that no, that instinct that you have that something is wrong and that you're being lied to is absolutely correct. But man, you better be careful on who you listen to and what solutions you're taking. Or being offered to you because it's going to have an impact on everything else that you do.
Yeah, there's more bad models than good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, pop culture and like most people that have big egos, gain big platforms and become admirable. But you don't see that. You see the surface. You don't see the iceberg under the surface, right? You don't see the
Yeah.
destruction that comes with us. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you live a selfish, self fulfilling life, it looks appealing on the surface, but you don't see all that comes with it, all the baggage comes with it, and the long term consequences of that. Because ultimately, you're going to be empty at the end.
Yeah.
And so for young men listening out there, like man, you probably feel most young men listening probably at some point have not felt it before, or you're gonna feel that point of decisiveness where you have to choose between, like I said, the masculinity, being the man you create to be, or being a person of faith, or submitting to culture and becoming demasculated. Right, you're gonna have to make one of these decisions, and I'll tell you that the Bible is even if you're not a Christian, the Bible is very clear, gives a very clear model for manhood. And if you probably listen to the show, you probably admire someone like Nick and some of the other people you mentioned. There's some great godly men out there that face their own struggles, but are figuring out that are good examples of guys who are trying to live biblical lives, doing great things, serving others, and being the people that God created them to be. That you can align your life after. And man, there's nothing more fulfilling than living in your purpose and aligning with your purpose. There's nothing you can do in life, no amount of money you can make, no career you can find, no achievement you can earn, that's going to be more fulfilling in your life in the moment, or especially at the end of your life, than living life as it was designed to live. I mean,
Let, let me ask you this because this is I remember I was having we were talking on the podcast and we were talking about masculinity under crisis and whatnot, and I was talking about we always talk about kind of five things, right? The spiritual, the emotional, the physical, the intellectual, and the professional. And it's like it's about like developing along each one of these lines, and the spiritual being the foundation for everything else because it provides direction on why you're doing the other things. And my co-host Christian, he was he was talking about the kind of the struggles that men face, and I kind of flippantly was like, okay, I get it, dude. Every generation has their problems. I guarantee you, the 19-year-old storming the beaches in Normandy, on Omaha Beach, didn't want to be there, right? They wanted to do other things, but they got over it, and those that made it home, they didn't sit there and whine about all of their circumstances. They found ways to improve it, and they found a new mission. And I was and look, everything I said was technically true.
mm-hmm.
And then we shut off, and And he said, I am so sick of hearing that. And I said, you're so sick of hearing what? He goes, I'm so sick of hearing stuff like that from men like you, Nick. And I said, what the heck are you talking about? He goes, I get it. You went to combat and I did it. He goes, you've also got a wife. You've also got children. You've also got a sense of meaning and purpose. You can look back to those things that you look at it as struggles or benefits. He goes, you know how hard it is for young men to find that now? You know how hard it is for young men to find a woman that wants to have that kind of relationship? Do you know how hard it is to be able to find that, to be able to want it? He goes, you think I don't want to get married? You think I don't want to have kids? You think I don't want to fulfill a noble purpose? You don't think I'm trying all that? And yet you get to sit here and be like, oh, well, try harder, do this. What? Seriously? And I remember, I got mad at him first. Like, what do you want to hear? And then I stopped for a second, and by the grace of God, I kind of shut up and just listened. And I realized that the crisis he was having was not an unwillingness to face challenges. It was searching for things to fight for. In a culture that is increasingly making life easy in one respect, easy in the respect that you're not worried where your next meal is coming from. Easy in the respect that, yeah, you're not living in a dangerous world where you're potentially getting shot at. Easy in the respect that you have all of these easy, cheap dopamine hits you can get from entertainment to porn to everything else, and have it just sap a culture of a desire to fight. And I got to admit, in that moment, for a second there, I was like, I don't know what to tell you, man. I don't know what to tell you, because I had to come to grips with the fact that even though I had unique challenges that my generation faced, because we had 9/11, we have a war, we had hardships, and a part of me realized that, man, as much as we look at those as hardships that we overcome, they did give us meaning and purpose. And then, and the fact that I could get married at 19 to the woman I loved gave me meaning and purpose. And the fact that we had kids, and he's looking at going, dude, we don't got that. You're asking us to fight for something we don't have, and that many of us believe we'll never have. What do you look at? What do you say with everything that you've gone through, that you've struggled with? Because nobody gets to look at Chad Robichaud and say it was easy. Nobody gets to look at Chad Robichaud and say, oh, but you had this ideal circumstances where everything, like, no, you fought for a lot of this stuff. And sometimes you fought in ways that you'd say was the wrong way to fight for it. But you figured something out. So what do you say to the young man that is trying to figure it out right now?
I mean, there is no shortage of conflict on planet Earth. Yeah, we faced a generation of most of our military time was in a career of war, but the war on terror is not the most significant battlefield on planet Earth. The most significant war on the planet Earth is the spiritual war that we're all engaged in, whether you're a believer or not. And our culture is at risk right now. I believe I'm super optimistic. We just had the election. And a lot of Christians, right? But what scares me with the election that we just won in President Trump's putting this dream team of cabinet together, the fear I have with all that is that Christians and young men watching this is like, we won. We won. Finish line. Man, this isn't the finish line. This is the start. And this just indicates we have so much work to do to just hand it off and say, we did our part. President Trump's in office. This cabinet's in office, and now they're going to save the day. No, it starts in your homes and your communities, and we're in a spiritual battle that is, if you can't recognize it, then man, get on your knees and pray that God will open your eyes to recognize this and show your eyes the spiritual war this culture's in, that the future wife you're going to have one day's in, that your future kids one day is going to be in, that your neighbors are going to be in, and find a place in that battle. There's a place for every man and woman, but especially in America right now, every man to have a spot in the trenches of this war. And if you feel like you don't have a mission and purpose and a noble cause to fight for, then you're blinded, and you need to get on your knees and pray God reveals your purpose in that. Because what I did in Afghanistan is something I'm proud of, but it's not near as important as the fights that we have every day here in America for the culture of this country. and the spiritual battle we have. Man, some Seth Gruber, young guy, what, 30 years old, never served in the military. He has pushed all his chips in to fight for the right for life of every unborn child in the world, and particularly in America. Like,
Mhm.
man, like that guy will save way more lives than ever saved in a war on terror. Is it as
Mhm.
cool or as sexy? Probably not. Like, probably not, right? I got cooler pictures and
Yeah.
a whole lot of stuff wall up here with some cool stuff, but in the grand scheme of the of eternity and the glory that's to be revealed to the in heaven and you know the the DD-214 of life is man,
Yeah.
he's like doing such amazing work. Guys like that, and there's so many of them. You don't have to put on a uniform or have a 9/11 to have a purpose. Like, look around. The world's a broken place. The enemy is up to destroy homes and families and our youth and our culture. Jump in a fight. Uh,
Yeah.
find a fight to get in.
No, I
There's no shortage of them.
Okay, look, honest talk here. It's Christmas, and I needed a little extra money in order to take care of my family, and so I did something that was a bit drastic. But look, I got some DMs asking me for this, so I have set up an only mugs page, right? It's where you can get all of the mugs and apparel that you see on the podcast and on my short form content. So, like, for instance, is your wife hotter than your coffee? The answer is yes, guys. The answer is always yes, right? So you can go get this mug. Plus, we also have the is your husband hotter than your coffee mug? So she can get one as well, which would be perfectly appropriate because I'm sure you are. And I don't mean that in a weird way. But the bottom line is if you go to Only Mugs, that's mugz.com, or you can do the link in the description. We've got hats, we've got t-shirts, we've got mugs, we got all that good apparel that you can get for fans of the show that let them go out there with the little sarcastic witticisms that I use on a daily basis, right? It's all there. Plus, if you order before December 16th, it's going to get there by Christmas. That's kind of important, right? We got a bunch of deals going on right now. Go out there, support the show. We thank you very much for watching. Let's get back to it. Yeah, I think that's important. I think that's really important. And I appreciate you. I appreciate you saying that, Chad, because it's something I've given a lot of time to think about because I do feel um I I don't want to say I get it in the sense that I know what it's like to go through it because I was going through my early 20s in a different time. Um, but I keep going back to the fights change, like but the answer still remains the same, right? It's like the moment again, the moment you find your identity where it's always supposed to have been, and the moment you start earnestly seeking what the mission is, and the moment you start leaning into it to where it's like there's a lot of things I can't control.
Yeah.
And for young men, they feel like they can't control anything right now. And it's like you're right. Like there's a lot of things you can't control. But the things that you can, right? Like pursuing that relationship with God, finding out what that purpose means in that, finding a fight to get into and developing those capabilities as you're doing it. I feel like I feel like they're really going to be amazed at how a lot of the other things that they're looking for in their life, whether it's a sense of meaning, purpose, accomplishment, a wife, children, I feel like uh, you're only going to start to see that when you stop looking inward to the sense of all the things that are happening to you and start looking outward. And it's like, okay, I can't deal with that, but I can deal with this. And so I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to focus on taking control of the things that I absolutely can, understanding what my purpose is and what my mission is, and understanding, I think most importantly, that once you put your identity in the right place, your identity and your purpose cannot be taken away from you. They can take everything else. They can't take that.
The first thing people need to do, and I'll say this to people that aren't in a relationship with Christ right now, you can't be who you're created to be unless you have a relationship with the Creator. Everybody wants to find their purpose. Everyone wants to find what they're created to do and what they exist for. If you're not a believer, you might not use the word created, but they want to find what they're here to do. I will say that there's no shortcut to that, right? You can't be who you're created to be unless you have a relationship with the Creator. That's step one. And then once you're there, then you could, specifically once you have a relationship with the Creator, you can understand that you're here to please God, and what's that look like? What's it look like for you, for your gifts and talents? We all have different gifts and talents and things like that. I do want to go back to what we're talking about the I've had this a lot, and you probably get it a lot too. So many guys that say to me, kind of what your friend said, like, they're just, especially guys that served in the military and didn't get to go to combat, they have
Mhm.
such a guilt
Yeah.
for not going to combat. And I'm like, man, first of all, if you raised your hand, you did everything that I did. Beyond that is circumstances and opportunity. And I get it. I get it because I got to. And
Mhm.
so it's easy for me to say that. Had I not got to, it would be eating me up too. But that's that. But I would also recognize now at the maturity I'm at in my life that what was eating me up was not that I missed anything. It would be my own ego that was eating me
Mhm.
up.
Mhm.
And but I would say to anyone who served in the military didn't, the most important battles in life, again, I said it already, I'll say it again, repeat myself here, but the most important battles in life are not in the war on terror. I get to say that as someone who did it, but it's not. It's really not. I think what I'm doing now is far more important than the work I did in Afghanistan. I love what I did in Afghanistan. I'm super proud of it. I mean, like I said, you can look at the walls in here. I'm super proud of what I did. But
Yeah.
it is not the most important thing I did in my life. The most important thing I did in my life is the work I do in ministry and fighting for the
Yeah.
spiritual battles that I do in life. And that's the most important work. I think that's what pleases God the most.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, Chad, I think tell everyone a little bit too. Like you've got a lot of organizations, things like that, a lot of places where people can find you. But where would be the best place for people to learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, man, the what spending the most time on right now is the Resilient Show, the show that you were on. TheResilientShow.com is the website. You can also go to ChadRobyShow.com. I do a lot of speaking in all my organizations, but I founded the Mighty Oaks Foundation, and the Mighty Oaks Foundation does resiliency programs for our active duty service members and first responders, recovery programs for those who are struggling or just looking for alignment in their lives, active duty service members, veterans, first responders, spouses. We pay for everything, including travel. So if you're listening and you're struggling or want some direction, and if you're into those parts of your life, where it's again active duty, veterans, first responders, or spouse, we pay for everything, including travel. If you want to support something like that, then definitely we could use your support. We do about $7 to $8 million a year in free programming. We do a lot of advocacy in DC. I'll serve again, probably. I served before President Trump's administration. I'll serve again as a chairman of the White House's Faith Based Coalition for Veteran Affairs and making sure our veterans and first responders have access to faith based care for alternative treatments outside of medication or in conjunction with. And then we do a lot of international work. Mighty Oaks takes veterans and first responders, been through our programs, found new purpose again, go around the world to help our allies replicate the programs we have. And then I work on a couple of other nonprofits that do humanitarian crisis work. One being the Fourth Option, where I'm, been all over the world, including um, with Afghanistan with Save Our Allies and going into Ukraine. And then in Ukraine, I've done with Fourth Option, done 10 trips to Ukraine, doing rescues there, all over South America. So we're doing stuff all over the world.
Mhm.
And those organizations all can be found on our website. Best place to keep up with me is probably Instagram. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's best
All right. Well, listen,
everything.
Chad. Again, I can't thank you enough, not just for the time you've given us here today, for having me on your show, the Resilient Show, as well, but most importantly for the work that you continue to do, and Kathy supporting you in that work, and the fact that again, I think at a time when it's needed most. Really an example for other men to look at and say, look, the road ain't perfect, but
Yeah,
it is about embracing it's about embracing the kind of masculinity, the kind of manhood that God created for you to embrace, and when you do it, it's amazing the not only the meaning and purpose you feel, but um, the rewarding aspect of being able to use those skill sets and those instincts in the service of God and in the service of the people He puts in your path. So,
yeah.
thank you very much, Chad. Really appreciate
Yeah, I
it.
want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to sell a book here. I just was, as you were saying, I was thinking like a great book for it's my newest book, A Mission Without Borders. People looking for purpose, and it's about me and my son in Ukraine, and this
Mhm.
father son kind of bringing your son to a war zone. It just has a lot of about purpose and mission, and tapping into identity and purpose. And if you're looking for a good book with, I mean, again, not trying to sell books. I always am, but not right now. I just really think that's a
Yeah.
subject.
No, no, definitely. I want people to check that out. And again, if you go to if you go to the I'm trying to want to make sure I get the right.
Yeah. ChadRobyShow.com probably has a link. You
Yeah.
get the book wherever books are sold. And I don't know if you know, I have fiction series coming out.
Yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah. We were talking about that. I'm kind of excited about that because it gives you an opportunity to kind of
Just have fun.
share some stuff in fiction that you probably couldn't share in reality.
That's right. Yeah,
and
yeah. It's called Smaller
yeah,
Horizons, and it's actually up for pre-sale on Amazon right now.
that's great. Yeah, and I really feel that too when you talk about the stuff with your son because my son just swore in for an option 40 contract. So
Congratulations.
he's going to be going to the Fort Benning. I guess it's now the Fort Benning School for Wayward Boys, and so he'll be on infantry, airborne, and then going over for Ranger assessment. So
Nice.
yeah, it's been interesting to kind of see that all from the perspective of a father now. But yeah, hey, Chad, once again, thank you very much. Thank you very much to everyone in the audience for watching. Please go into the link in the description. You can learn more about joining our larger intentional community. That's where you can give us some more suggestions on who you'd like to see as guests, what sort of topics you'd like to cover, and some of the other things that we do with some of our live broadcasts, as well as our monthly meetups with Tina and myself. We got some more stuff that's going out there with respect to our shop and whatnot. But anyways, thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you next episode.